Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from newcoder.com and welcome to part 4 of my tutorial series on authentication and authorization with the MERN stack. So in this tutorial, we're going to be creating our express routes. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is we're going to head over to our app.js file and we are going to delete all of our mongoose stuff. So I created this code in a previous tutorial, and this was just to test out if our mongoose stuff was working. So we don't need this anymore. And now what I want to do is actually require the user router that we're going to create. So we don't have this file yet. And we're going to create a folder called routes to hold our routes. And the file name is going to be user. Next, we're going to tell our Express application to use this. So the endpoint that we're going to use is called user. And then we're just going to pass in our user router. Okay, so let's save this. So we're done with our app.js file. And now I'm going to hit Control B. Let's bring up the Explorer. And let's actually create this folder that we did down here. So new folder, we're going to call it routes. And we're going to create a new file of user. Okay, so let's close that, Control B. Next, what we're going to do is require some packages. So I'm just going to say const express, and we're going to require express. We need our express router. So I'm just going to say const user router is going to be equal to express.router. Next, what we're going to do is require passport. Now, in the previous tutorial, we basically covered all our passport configuration. But in this tutorial, we're actually going to use it. So we are going to require that. We're also going to require the actual file that we created for passport. And I'm just going to call this passport config. And we are going to require it. And we need to go up one level and require the passport file. Okay, so if I hit Control B, we're in the routes folder. We go up. Then we're here at this level, and then we import our passport file that we created. So this is all our passport configuration that we're going to be using. Okay, so now we got that out of the way. Let's require our mongoose models. So I'm just going to say const user, and we're going to require it. We need to go within the models folder, and we need to require the user. And likewise, let's copy this. Let's paste it. We are going to require the ToDo models. So let's change that to ToDo. Okay, so there is one more module that I need here, and it's called JSON Web Token. So we do not have that installed yet, so I'm going to bring up the terminal. Let's clear this, and I'm going to type npm install JSON Web Token. Okay, so we're going to be using this package to basically sign our JWT tokens. So when you sign a JWT token, you're basically creating it for us. So that's what we're going to be using that for. And let's actually bring that into our user.js file. So I'm just going to say const JWT is equal to require JSON web token. Okay, so let's close our terminal. Let's close our package explorer. We don't need that. And now what I want to do is create our first route. So we're going to come down here. I'm going to say user router dot post. And the first thing we're going to make is our register. So when a user wants to create a username. So we have register as our endpoint. And we're going to get a callback with the request object, the response object. Now in here, what we can do is I could say const, and what we're going to do is pull out the username, password, and role from the request body. Okay, after we do that, the first thing we need to do is check to see if this username exists. So I'm just going to say user.find1, And we're going to query by the username. So we're going to check to see if this username exists. And we're going to get a callback. We're going to get the error object and the user document back if it exists. And we're just going to say if there's an error, that means there was an error searching this username within our database. So we're just going to say res.status. And let's set this to status 500. And we're going to send back JSON. And we're just going to send back a message. So I'm just going to say message. And this message is going to have a message body. And we're just going to say an error has occurred. And then we're going to send another property and say message error. And we're just going to set that to true. Okay. So this looks good. So we have a message. We're sending back two properties. The message body is the message that we want to display. And I just sent back an additional flag. And we'll see how this is used when we start to go into our React stuff. So let's close all that. So if there is an error, we do that. If there is no error, we check to see if there is a user. So if there is a user, that means that the username that this individual is trying to create already exists. So he can't have this username. So what I'm going to do is let's come up here and let's cheat a little bit. So let's copy this and let's tab that. Let's do a status code of 400. And instead of saying error has occurred, we can say username is already taken. So they have to pick another username, in other words, if they want to create an account. Otherwise, if this is not true, that means we can successfully create a username for this user. So what we're going to do is come down here. And the first thing we're going to do is create an instance of our mongoose model. So I'm just going to say const new user. I'm going to say new user. And we're going to pass in all the stuff that we pulled out from our request body. So I'm just going to say username, password, and the role. Okay. Next, all that's left to do is to actually save this user into the database. So new user.save. And we're going to get a callback. So I'm just going to say error. And we're going to come here and say if there's an error. And I know this code is getting a little bit repetitive, but if there's an error while actually saving this new account, let's actually cheat again. Let's copy this. Come down here. Let's paste that. Let's tab that in. Okay, that looks good. So if there's an error, we just send that back. If there is no error, that means we successfully created this user. So I'm going to paste this one more time. And we are going to set the status to 201. And we're going to say with the message, account successfully created. And we're going to set this message error to false since everything went according to plan. Okay, so this is our register route. Let's save this. Let's open a new terminal. I'm going to say npm start router.use requires a middleware function but got an object. Okay. So we did not export our user route. So we're just going to come down here, say module.exports user router. Let's try this again. Okay, so our server is up and running. And what I'm going to do is bring in postman. So if you don't know what postman is, it basically allows us to test our API endpoints without actually building a front end. So I have all these requests already done beforehand just to save some time. So if you've never used this before, download it. It's called Postman. It's pretty self-explanatory with the installation process. you'll get a screen like this and you could build a request. So here I have a post request, and this is our endpoint, localhost 5000 user register. For our header, we are sending back JSON, so make sure the content type is application JSON. And for the body, we are going to be testing this with this data. So here, make sure to set it to raw and make sure that it's set to JSON. So we have the server running. If I hit send, let's see if this works. So here we get our JSON message back from the server. So this is actually what we're getting back from the server. We get message body, account successfully created, and there is no error while creating this account. So now we have an account called testing1 with the password testing123. So now if I send this request again, let's see what happens. And there you go. You see that we get a different response. It says username is already taken because we're trying to create an account that already exists. And then we have message error of true. So our user register route is working perfectly fine. So now let's move on to our other routes. All right, so now let's move on to our other routes. So let's close the terminal for now. And the second route I want to do is the logon route. So I'm just going to copy all this because I am lazy. Let's copy this part. Let's get a head start at least. We are going to set this to login. And here, what we're going to do is actually use our passport middleware. So let's come up here and our middleware goes here. So I'm just going to say passport.authenticate. And the first argument is going to be the strategy that you want to use to authenticate. And it's going to be called local. And the second thing we're going to do is set the session to false. So the server is not maintaining the session. Okay, so if you're unaware with this local, if I hit Control B, bring up the Explorer, we go to our passport, we create a local strategy here. So when you say passport.authenticate local, you're saying I want you to use this. So we already defined this here. So we will close that. Let's come back here. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to test to see if we've been authenticated. So I'm just going to say if request.is authenticated. And is authenticated is going to be added by passport by default. So this is going to return true if we've been authenticated and false if we haven't. So if we've been authenticated, what we're going to do is say const, we are going to pull out the primary key, the username, and the role from the request.user. Now, if you're wondering where on earth request.user is coming from, again, it is from our passport. If we come down here, user.compare password. So we need to check this file. So we are going to go to our models, go to user. You can see that if we've been authenticated, that this is the callback that's being used. So we pass error and we're passing the user object itself. So what passport is doing is attaching that user object to the request object. So if you're wondering where request.user comes from, that's where it's coming from. Next, what we're going to do is actually create a JWT token since we've successfully signed in. So I'm just going to say const token is going to be equal to sign token, and we're going to pass in the primary key. Now we haven't created the sign token function, but we will in a second. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to set the cookie. We're going to set it as the access token. We are going to pass in the JWT token, and we're going to set some options. So we're going to set HTTP only to true, and we're going to set same site property to true as well. Okay, so let's talk about these two properties here for a second. So HTTP only is going to make it so that on the client side that you cannot touch this cookie using JavaScript, basically. And that's to prevent against cross-site scripting attacks. Now, same site property is to protect against a different attack. So the same site property is to prevent against cross-site request forgery attacks. So these two properties are pretty important in terms of security and making sure that your JWT token doesn't get stolen. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, let's finish this up by sending back a response. So I'm just gonna hit Control B. I'm gonna say res.status. I'm gonna set that to 200. Let's send back some JSON. And we're gonna say is authenticated. We are gonna set that to true because they successfully logged in. And next we're gonna pass back our user. So I'm gonna say user. And we're gonna send back the username and the role. Okay. So in order to actually test this out, we are going to have to create this sign token function. So I'm going to come up here and let's put this on the top. I'm going to say const sign token. And this sign token is going to take in the primary key. So I'm just going to say user ID. And what we're going to do is return JWT.sign. So JWT.sign is going to return the actual JWT token. Okay, so the first argument we're going to pass in is the payload. So here, what I am going to do is we are going to set the ISS or the issuer. So who issued this JWT token? I'm going to set this to new coder. The second property we're going to set is sub or the subject. So who is this JWT token for? So we're going to set that to user ID. And again, this is the primary key of the user. And that's pretty much all we're going to set. Now remember, in your payload, you can send back whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But just keep in mind that you shouldn't send back any sensitive data. So no credit card information, no social securities, none of that. Okay, now the second argument is going to be the key that you want to sign with. So we set this to new coder. Now this is important. So when you sign, you are creating this JWT token. So if I go to passport, you have to make sure that this matches the secret or key that you used within your passport. So passport is going to use this secret or key, noob coder, to verify that this token is legitimate. So they have to match. So we set this to noob coder, and I'm actually going to copy and paste this to make sure that they are both the same. Otherwise, this is not going to work. Next, we have our options. So there's an option called expires in, and I'm going to set it to 1 hour. So you could say 1 day, 1 hour like I did. By default, I think they use milliseconds. So you could say 5,000. That's going to set it to milliseconds. So I'm just going to put 1 hour. And this should be good to go. So let's save this and let's actually test this out. So we're going to restart the server. Say npm start. Okay, server's up and running. Let's get postman out. So let's bring postman over here. So here we have our second request. So we have user login, same exact thing, same headers, content type, application JSON. The body is raw and we're sending back JSON. So I already have our username and password here. So let's test this out. So I've successfully signed in. So you can see here is authenticated true. Username is testing1 and the role is user. Another thing we're going to check here is if we come here, there's something called cookies. So here you can see that that request actually gave us a cookie, the access token that we set within our login. And here you can see access token is set to this JWT token. So I am just going to copy all this. And let's go to jwt.io. Let's bring this back over here. So we did cover this in the previous tutorial. And we are going to copy and paste the JWT token that we just created. So here you go. And it's complaining about invalid signature, but that's because we haven't provided our secret. Okay, so here we have the JWT token that we just created. And here is our payload. So once again, I can't emphasize this enough. Your payload is not encrypted. Anyone who gets access to your JWT token can see what's in it. So never put any private information here. So here we have our issuer, new coder, subject is the primary key. And you saw that that option that we passed in expires in automatically created a issue at. So when this token was created, and an expiration. So when this token will expire and no longer be valid. So that is looking good. So now this looks pretty good for our login. So we're pretty much done. There's nothing else for us to test with login. So let's get rid of this and let us move on to our next route. And let's move on to our next route. Okay, so now I am going to come down here. Let's close the Explorer. Let's close the terminal right now. And we are going to create our logout route. So I'm just going to copy all this. And this time our logout route is going to be a GET request. And we're going to change this to logout. We are going to keep the passport authenticate, which is fine. The only difference is instead of using our local strategy, we're going to use JWT. And we are going to set this to false because we don't want the server to maintain the session. And let us get rid of all this. And all we're going to do for our logout is we're going to say res.clear cookie. And we are going to delete the JWT token. So we set that as the access token. So we're going to remove that. And then we are going to send a JSON response. And we are just going to say user. We're going to set the username to an empty string. And we are going to set the row of empty. And the next property we are going to get is the success. So whether or not we successfully logged out or not. Okay, so this one is pretty short and pretty self-explanatory. So we are just removing the JWT token. So that means that they have to sign in again if they want to access their to-dos or the admin panel. Okay, so this looks good. Again, this is very short. We'll see in a second if this is actually good. We'll start the server up. And we are getting an error. So it says something about, yep, that makes sense. So we just add that. Just added a space and let's see if this works now. Does not work. Oh, I am a complete idiot. Okay. So yeah. Third time's the charm and we got it to work. Okay. So let's bring in postman. And here we are moving on to our third route. So I have this made already. Localhost port 5000 user logout. It is a GET request. Headers, we're not sending anything back. So body should be empty as well. And let's send this request out. Actually, first, let me check cookies. So cookies, we have our access token. That's from when we logged in. Let's send this request. And there you go. So we set the user to empty strings and a row of empty strings, and it is successfully logged out. So if we were to go to cookies again, you'll see that our access token is gone, and that's because we cleared it. So we successfully logged out. And if we were to hit send again, you can see that we get unauthorized. And that's because by default, if you make a request with the JWT strategy and you fail to be authenticated, it's going to automatically send a 401 unauthorized status to us. Okay, so that seems to be working. And let's move on to the next route. Okay, so now what I want to move on to is actually creating a to-do. So I'm just going to copy all of this. And we are going to create a to-do. So it has to be a post request. And we are going to say / to-do. Okay. So again, you have to be logged in order to create a to-do. So this is fine. Okay, and we are going to remove all this. And the first thing we're going to do is actually create an instance of our Mongoose model. So I'm just going to say const to-do. And we're going to say new to-do. And we are just going to put the request body. So this is from the client. So whatever the client wanted us to create. Next, what we're going to do is actually save this to-do. So I'm just going to say to-do.save. And I'm just going to say error. If there's an error, what are we going to do is we are going to cheat. And that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to copy this. We are going to come back down here. Let's paste that. Okay, so this is a database error, so there's nothing really we could do about it. So error has occurred, message error is true. Okay, so that's fine. So if there is no error, what we want to do, say else, is we're going to say request.user.todos, and we are going to push this newly created to-do into our user. So just a quick reminder, request.user, again, this is added by Passport. So Passport actually attaches the user to the request object. So this user is from our database. And if you see here, let's go back to our schema. We have to-dos here. And these to-dos is an array of to-dos. But this is the primary key. So we need to save that within our user. So let's get rid of that. So what we're doing is adding this to-do to the to-dos array within our user. And then I'm going to say request.user.save. And we're going to get the same error object call. Pass in this callback. And once again, if there's an error, something terrible has happened. So let us copy that. And if there is no error, what we are going to do is say res.status, and we are going to send a status of 200, and we're going to send some JSON back. So we are going to say message. We're going to have a message body, and we are going to say successfully created to do. And our message error is going to be false. Okay. So this is pretty much all there is to it. So let's actually test this out. So I'm going to save this. Let's restart the server. Okay, everything's up and running. Now I'm going to go to a postman. Let's bring that over here. Let us go to, is this a create? Yep. So we have our post user /to-do Headers, obviously, we're sending back JSON. So we set application JSON. Body, this is our to-do that we want to insert. Okay, so let us send a request, see what happens. Okay, so we get unauthorized, and I probably should have suspected that because we logged out previously. So we need to log in again. So I'm going to go back to our login. We are going to log in. Okay, so I should be logged in right now. Now I'm back to to-dos. I'm going to hit send again. And there you go, successfully created to-do, message error of false. So let's create another to-do. So this is 1, let's make this 2. Okay, that's successfully created. And let's make one more. So we'll send this. Okay, so this is pretty much all there is to it for creating a to-do. But now, obviously, the next route we're going to do is obviously to get all the to-dos. So we can actually see if our to-dos successfully saved to the database or not. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to come down here. Let's make some space by closing the terminal. And we are going to copy this. Probably going to get rid of a lot of this code. And this time, since we're getting to-dos, we are going to make a get request. And I called it to-dos since this is going to return every single to-do that our user has, okay? So everything is fine here. We could get rid of all this. And now what we can do is I could say user.find by ID. And here we're going to query to find the ID. So I'm just going to say underscore ID. And this is going to be within our request user.underscore ID. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is say dot populate. And we are going to populate the to-dos array. So right now, when we find the user, the to-dos array is only going to have the primary keys within it. I don't want just the primary keys. I want the actual data within the to-dos. So that's what populate and the field name of to-dos means. Next, we are just going to execute this. And we are going to get a callback. So we're going to pass error and the document. And now what we're going to do, if there is an error. By the way, you guys should be using error middleware. You can see that I'm copying and pasting this a bunch of times, but don't do what I'm doing. And you shouldn't have to copy and paste this a bunch of times. Okay, so an error has occurred. Okay, that's fine. So if something went wrong, we are just going to send the standard error message that we've been creating. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to say res.status. We're going to set the status of 200. We are going to be sending back JSON. And we're going to send back the to-dos. So document.todos. Okay. And the second thing we're going to send back is authenticated. And we are going to set that to true. Okay. So to-dos obviously is all the to-dos our user has, and authenticated is just for our front end to let us know that we are still logged in. All right, so let's actually test this out. So let's cancel this. npm start. Bring back postman. And I should have a request here. So remember, we created 3 to-dos. So let's actually see if we actually have 3 to-dos. So we're not sending back anything. So headers is empty, body is empty, and this is a get request. So let's send a request. And there you go. These are the 3 to-dos that we just created. So you can see example to-do 1, example to-do 2, and example to-do 3. And we get this flag of authenticated is true. Okay, so our get to-dos route is successful. And we have 2 more routes to do, so we are almost done. So let us finish this up. So let's close the terminal. Let's give us more space. And the next route we're going to do is the admin panel. So I'm just going to actually copy this. Let's paste that. So instead of to-dos, this is going to be admin. We are going to leave all this alone. And within here, if we get within here, within our code, because remember, passport.authenticate JWT is going to send a unauthorized request if we do not have our JWT token. So if we get authorized, now we need to check to see if the user has the right permissions, since this is an admin panel. So I'm going to say if request.user.role is equal to admin, that means that this user does have the right permissions to be here. So I'm just going to say res.status, set that to 200, .json, and we are going to send the message of message body. And we are going to say you are an admin. And then we'll say message error is false. Okay. So we're basically checking their role to see if they have access to this endpoint. So if they are not of role admin, that means that they are a user, since we only have 2 roles. So otherwise, what we are going to do is say res.status. We're going to set that to 403, so they are not authorized. We're going to say JSON message body. You're not an admin. Go away. And we're going to say, oh, not message body, message error. And we are going to set that to true. Okay. So pretty short and sweet. Let's save this. Let's open up the terminal, restart the server. And now let's bring in postman. So just to refresh our memories, when I created our user, we have a role of user. So this user should not be able to access this admin panel. So let's go to our admin panel. And again, we are not sending anything back, so headers and body should be empty. Let's send our request. And there you go. We get you're not an admin, go away, and true. So let's create a new user. So let's log out first. Okay, we're logged out. Let's go to register. We'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. And this time, instead of a user, he's going to be an admin. So we are going to register as this. So our account is successfully created. I'm going to copy this. We are going to log in now. Okay, so now let's log in. Okay, so we should be logged in right now. So now let's test the admin panel again. We're going to send a request. And there you go. Since we are an admin user, we have access to the admin panel. Okay, and we have one more route in order to finish this up. And the last route that we're going to do is mainly for persistence on the client. So if you ever worked with React, what we want to do is once we logged in, we save in the state that we are logged in. The problem with that is once you close the browser, the state gets reset. So what this endpoint is going to do is make sure that our backend and our front end is synced in. So even when the user closes and visits the website again, that he'll still be logged in if he was authenticated. So let us copy all this. And this one is really short. And what I ended up calling this is just authenticated. So we'll just use that. And everything is good up top. Let's remove all this. And what I'm going to do is say const, and we are going to pull out the username and the role from the request.user. And we are just going to send them back. So this is going to be a status code of 200. JSON is authenticated. We are going to set that to true. And we are going to send the user information here. So the username and the role. Okay, so this is our last route. Let's restart the server. Let's open up Postman. And here we go. So our GET request, we are hitting our authenticated endpoint. So now let's check the header. It should be nothing. Body is nothing. And we are going to send a request. And there you go. So it is authenticated, true, user, all that stuff here. So again, this is only going to be used for persistence to work with our front end. So that is pretty much all I want to cover with this tutorial. I know this is a long tutorial, but in the upcoming tutorial, we should be working with React. So I'll see you guys there.